The Money Pit is a 1986 released comedy directed by Richard Benjamin.
It stars Tom Hanks and Shelley Long as a couple who purchase basically a big mansion worth, approximately $1 million, and they get it for the knockdown price of $200,000. So it seems like a bargain at the time. But as soon as they move in, things start to go wrong and bits of the house start to fall apart. The front door falls off, the stairs collapse, the plumbing is completely knackered. There's just brown sludge coming out of the taps. Yeah, it's not quite the bargain they expected. The reason they're looking for somewhere new to live is that they've been subletting Shelley Long's ex-husband's apartment in New York. He's a famous conductor played by Alexander Godunov. He's been in Europe for a while and he's come back early, so they have to move out quick, sharpish. And unfortunately, they don't have any money because Tom Hanks' father has just embezzled a load of money from their clients, so they're attorneys for loads of musicians. We see him at the start of the film in Brazil marrying a young bride. So unfortunately, he's skint. They don't have any money. It's difficult to find anywhere to live in New York, so they decide to go for it. But yeah, that's the bulk of the film is them trying to deal with this money pit of the title. And the more it falls apart, as does their relationship, especially with the ex-husband back in the picture as well.
So this closes off our month of comedy. We decided to do a month of comedy in January. So this week, we've decided to do The Money Pit, Tom Hanks and Shelley Long. And this is one that I had seen a long time ago and hadn't seen it for a while. But I'm a big fan of Tom Hanks, especially a fan of Tom Hanks, back in the 80s when he was making these comedies. Big, Turner and Hooch, Dragnet, Splash, The Burbs, Joe versus the Volcano. He made so many comedies, didn't he, back in the 80s? So many. And then, of course, I think he did Philadelphia and then, changed and became a serious actor. I mean, yeah, he's an actor. He can do what he likes, but he was always very good at comedy vehicles. But he hasn't really done many of these kind of wacky comedies since he did Philadelphia, which he was very good in. And of course, I think did he win an Oscar for that?
I think he did, yeah. And Forrest Gump as well.
And Forrest Gump, of course, yeah.
I mean, he's now sort of more famous for sort of playing real life people, isn't he? Because, of course, he was Captain Phillips, and then he was Sully. I can't think of any others, but there's definitely others either in the works or that he's made where he's played. Well, he was in the Disney thing, wasn't he? Saving Mr. Banks, where he played Walt Disney.
And, of course, he recently played Mr. Rogers. So, yes, you're right. He's kind of become famous for playing real-life people. So, The Money Pit, I mean, I think this is a great film. I think it's very funny. It's Tom Hanks doing that crazy, slapstick, over-the-top, comedic stuff that he did so well back in the 80s. And he kind of, revs it up to 10 in this film. And it's kind of pretty crazy. But it's a very funny film. I have to say it's very absurd as well. There's quite... It doesn't completely work, this film. It's a bit odd at times.
I mean, I think it's a little slow to start. I don't know, 25 minutes in before we actually get to the house. I mean, you could argue that maybe the gags in the house outstay their welcome because it is repeating the same sort of joke. Something falls apart and then a few minutes later something else falls apart and then something else falls apart. So it depends how much you can sort of stomach the same gag repeated. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's, it's the same gag done in different ways. And Tom Hanks sells it every time. And I'd say towards the end, the tone changes slightly, becomes a bit more serious. But anyway, it's still lots of laughs to be had.
I see what you mean. I kind of disagree. I mean, but that's subjective. That's, I like that humour. I mean, we spoke a couple of weeks ago when we did The Great Outdoors. I mentioned Laurel and Hardy, and I'm a huge fan of Laurel and Hardy, and a lot of their films and their short films had this kind of setup inside where things just went wrong around them. They broke things crashed, people they hurt themselves in comical ways, which is kind of what's going on in this film. And I enjoy that. I mean, it's timed perfectly. There's lots of amazing, chimneys falling down and things falling through floors and people falling through floors and things flying through windows and out of windows. And I love all that kind of anarchic comedy that those old black and white films did so well, like Laurel and Hardy and the Marx Brothers. And so I liked all the comedy stuff in there. And for me, it didn't get boring. What I found odd was the kind of the stuff around that. The relationship between Tom Hanks and Shelley Long is great, and the relationship between Shelley Long and her ex-husband, played by Alexander Godunov, is great. There's other bits in here that it's kind of bookended with this thing with his father, which is a bit odd. And then there are these really odd moments where Tom Hanks has these kind of conversations with other people, which I really found quite absurd. There's a bit where he asks for money from this kid, and it's really absurd because you're not quite sure what's going on in that scene.
No.
And for me, to me, it kind of felt like they'd come up with this really good idea for a house that falls apart, and they didn't quite know what to do with that. So they put all that stuff's there in the film, all the house falling apart around them is great, but then they just weren't sure where to put it. I mean, it is actually a remake, this film, isn't it?
Yeah, it's called Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, which was a 1948 film starring Cary Grant, which was based on a book. It's also kind of been remade again as an Ice Cube film called Are We Done Yet, which is a sequel to Are We There Yet? So, which I've seen Are We There Yet? But I haven't seen Are We Done Yet? I don't really have any desire to. So I couldn't tell you how much of a remake it is. I'm assuming that they have a house and bits fall off it.
Again, I haven't seen the original, the Cary Grant film, so I can't say what went on in that film that is different from this. Again, I'm sure, the main gist of this film is the house falling apart and the relationship between this couple trying to survive this house falling apart. I personally found some of the kind of the I suppose the filler, the stuff round the edges, because there's lots of people he meets. Obviously, there's, he has to get the money, so he meets like lawyers and friends, and like there's, like I said, there's this child who kind of rules over his parents, and he's got to kind of get the money from him, and it's done in a kind of mafia way. It's very odd, that scene. Talking about Lauren Hardy, all the kind of house stuff, it's very cartoonish, this film. It's very over the top. It's not very realistic. It's absurd. Yeah. And then all the stuff around it is kind of absurd as well. There's this band that he's kind of got. He's a lawyer, isn't he? So he's doing work with this band. So you've got this big rock band, but then there's this other band where all the members are kind of all, wearing women's clothes, and they're all quite oversized gentlemen as well, which is quite... There's lots of very odd stuff going on within the film. It's quite absurd, actually, and I don't know if all that works, but all the house stuff, I really, really enjoy it, and I love the relationships, like I said, between the kind of the three leads in the film. Tom Hanks he's so funny. He's a great comedic actor as well, and he always hits those comedic moments perfectly every time. Shelley Long is excellent, I thought, in this as his girlfriend wife, trying to stay sane for much of the time. And I think their relationship together was really, I really enjoyed that. And then Alexander Goodenough as well, who of course was in Die Hard.
Probably his most famous role, I would have thought, but sadly he passed away. I think it was mid-90s, something like that.
Yeah, he was 45, so very young.
But yeah, he's obviously in Die Hard, he plays a villain, and he's, quite a menacing presence. Completely different in this. He's self-centered, but, quite a funny character.
Completely different. I think he does. I think he plays it. He plays straight really well, but he also plays comedy very well as well, and he puts those two together, and I think he does it really well. He kind of feels quite realistic. I don't know a lot of... He's a conductor of an orchestra, and I don't know many conductors of orchestras. I have family who know people like that, and a lot of them are a little bit like that, I think. So I think he gets that quite realistic. He probably would know because he was a ballet dancer, and so he kind of came from similar world to a classical musician. And I think he famously defected, didn't he, from the USSR in the early 80s. But I think it's a shame he didn't do more roles, because I think he really, Die Hard, he is just like he's muscle, isn't he, in Die Hard? And he's in Witness as well. He plays one of the Amish men in Witness as well. I think a really interesting actor, and it's a shame he didn't get to do more, and he did die so young. But I think he and Shelley Long are great, and Shelley Long and Tom Hanks are great, and I think it's those three are really well cast, and they perform really well in this. I think it's there's some great gags, some great visual gags in this film. I think the props department must have had a whole load of fun putting this thing together in this crazy house. There's a wonderful kind of, I suppose what I'd call it, a dominoes falling down moment, when one thing leads to another, leads to another. And it's just all perfectly... that's why I love this film, because I love those old kind of screwball comedies and the Lauren Hardy and things like that. And that's why that part of the film works for me so well, I think.
That long sequence that starts off inside and then moves outside and ends up with the scaffolding falling down and everything, that, you make that black and white, and it could be, out of a Buster Keaton film or something, with Buster Keaton chucking himself through windows and off scaffolding. There's some great stunts in there by the stunt guys. That stuff is all really well done and fun to watch. But like you say, yeah, some of the stuff around it, maybe not so much. And towards the end of the film, it kind of takes on as the relationship breaks down, kind of takes on a slightly different tone, which doesn't maybe fit with the rest of the film. And there's also, talk about strange things going on. That when one of the is it the plumber? I think when the first plumber arrives, he sort of tries to sexually assault Shelley Long. It's a bit weird. It's all a bit strange, and it kind of, I don't know. I mean, I suppose, all the sort of tradesmen that come are sort of portrayed as a bit dodgy. But I don't really see the point of, you can portray that without him trying to touch somebody up.
Yes, and it feels quite unsettling, because then even Tom Hanks kind of, there's a joke going on there, and he kind of lets him get away with it, doesn't he? Which is the whole, and even Shelley Long doesn't look comfortable with what's being done anyway, and it's an odd moment. I mean, I have to say the end, where the relationship does break down, I didn't feel that kind of pulled me out of the film. I felt it really good because they played it so well. I believe that they were a couple. Sometimes it's hard to believe when you don't always believe that they're actually couples, but they actually worked as a couple in this film. And so when it broke down, I felt that to be quite realistic.
Well, I mean, it would test anyone's relationship, all the stuff that they endure.
Exactly. It made me nervous though, because I'm actually at this moment waiting to move into a new place. So
You'd be nervous when you turn on the tap in case any brown sludge comes out of it.
I think what's also interesting about this film is there's lots of cameos in this film, I don't know if they're cameos, but I mean, they're people that have kind of gone on to be well known, because obviously this is now got 30 years old, this film. I mean, there's people like Joe Mantegna in there. Is that how you pronounce his name? Josh Mostel, who of course we covered, he was in The Chase that we did, our first film we did on the channel, he was in that. Philip Bosco is another name, I think, kind of a face I recognised from other films. I think they're
there's lots of sort of character actors.
Character actors, yeah, and they're in quite small parts, but they're very good in the small parts that they're in. They're very funny. And I think lots of the construction workers, quite a few of them I recognised as being faces. There's Frankie Faison, who turned up in The Wire. Michael Jetta, who was actually in The Fisher King that we covered. And he was in The Green Mile with Tom Hanks as well. So, lots of kind of little bit part roles for some quite interesting actors out there. And kind of blink and you miss it moments. And of course, it was directed by Richard Benjamin. And he himself was an actor before he became a director. He was in films like Catch-22 and a lot of comedy roles, specifically some Neil Simon films, The Sunshine Boys and stuff like that. And he's directed quite a few films, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, I recognise him from Westworld. He was the lead in Westworld, the original film. But yeah, I mean, he directed a few things. I mean, The Mermaids, the Cher film, Made in America, another 90s thing with Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Danson. My Stepmother is an Alien, I think the Kim Basinger film.
Oh, did he make that? I remember that film.
Yeah. I mean, that's Dan Aykroyd, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I vaguely remember that.
And also, we don't tend to talk about the producers on a film, but this time round, the producers are quite like heavyweights, quite famous. So we got produced by Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, and it was executively produced by Steven Spielberg himself, the big man himself. And of course, he went on to work with Tom Hanks a few times.
Yeah. He's been in a few. Spielberg films, and yeah, I mean, obviously Kathleen Kennedy's produced a lot of Spielberg's films as well. Money Pit might be the first time they were sort of all on the same film. I think this was quite an early film for Kathleen Kennedy, and Tom Hanks certainly hadn't been in any Spielberg films before. So yeah, it might have been one of the first times they all worked together.
And then he went on to do Big a couple of years later, and I think that was executively produced by Spielberg. I know it was Anne Spielberg, Steven Spielberg's sister, who wrote Big, directed by Penny Marshall. And then of course, history prevailed and Hanks went off to working with Spielberg on some much bigger films. There's not a huge amount to say about this film. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's quite odd. I think quite absurd, quite cartoonish humour going on. And, you'll either love it or you'll hate it. I think it's kind of one of those films, I think. I think if you're a fan of maybe those old Laurel Hardy type films, then you probably get something out of it. I'm not sure. Do let us know if you've seen it or you haven't seen it or what you think about it. But this week, this one is on Amazon Prime, which is why we're covering it. Because if you live in the UK, then you can watch it on Prime for free. But are there DVDs, Blu-rays?
Yeah. It's not a particularly unknown film, and of course it's Tom Hanks, isn't it? So yeah, I mean it's on DVD and Blu-ray, not hard to find. I don't think there's any sort of special editions with any features or anything. But yeah, I mean if you're a Tom Hanks fan, I mean who isn't? Let's face it, he's such a likeable guy. then and you haven't seen it before, then definitely check it out. You know, sort of classic 80s Hanks, really. You know, if you've seen Big or Splash, you kind of know what you're in for performance-wise from him.
Yeah, so like I said at the beginning, this is our close to our month of comedy, although it does kind of lead us into next month, because next month we've decided, because Valentine's Day is in February, we've decided to do a month of alternative romantic comedies. And as this one is kind of a romantic comedy within this crashing down house, then you could kind of lead this one into next month. So we thought we'd do a month of films in honour of Valentine's Day, because of course all those lovers in lockdown, they can't wait to be reminded of Valentine's Day this year.
No. It's gonna be a great one.
And that was the Money Pit. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button over there, and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over here. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and join us again next week for another video.